That September 11th, I was at home getting ready to go to work. I worked for United Airlines at the time, and I actually saw it unfold on TV, and my phone rang at the same time. And I received a call from my boss asking me to come in early because something was not correct that day, and he couldn't explain anymore, just because of the severity of everything. So I quickly got ready. At the time, I lived right across the street from United Airlines, and I ran over, got into work, went through a whole new set of security that was never set up before, and found myself on the third floor of the headquarters building in the operations center, watching the rest of the events unfold, being told what was going on and how everything had officially changed in our industry. And it was hard. I wasn't able to call my parents or receive calls from them. Security was tightened down at United just because we were an airline affected by the events. And I had to wait till the following day to actually talk to my parents and let them know I was okay, and to find out how they were feeling about everything going on, because this was new to our family. We never had somebody in our family affected by a tragedy like this. So it was a long, slow learning process for all of us about what I could say, what I could do, who I could associate with for the following week. It was very hard. I feel like I've come a long way in the 10 years. I still have friends and associates that I know at United. My boyfriend still flies for United. He's a pilot. So every day when he goes out on a trip, I have a hard time. Just hoping and praying that he comes back safely and nothing happens. With this anniversary coming up, it's extremely hard because he will be on the road flying over it. So we take it one day at a time and grow and prepare ourselves.
Thank you, Vicki.
Well, we were at home at the time. We weren't traveling or anything. We heard it on the radio, and then we turned the TV on and saw all the details of it. And we're quite awed by it. This was really kind of a shock. Because we had been in New York City, and we'd seen the trade towers. Never been inside of them, but it just almost unbelievable that those huge buildings could come down the way they did. Yeah. So.
And that day we were packing, getting ready to go on a week-long trip up into Canada with friends. And we called each other, and well, we didn't know for sure what we should do, and then we heard on TV that the borders were closed, so that made it all the more serious that, there could be something more happening, and it just really stirred the nerves and not really knowing what was going on.
And you shared with me an interesting reflection in the days afterwards as well.
And in the days afterwards, I would go outside, and it was so quiet outside. There's no airplanes going over. Our local air, of course, all the air was closed, so even the little airplanes weren't flying, and it was just very quiet. It almost seemed like the birds weren't even singing. It was just very different.
And interesting, this trip we'd planned up the west coast of British Columbia, which is called the Sunshine Coast because it's in the rain shadow of the Olympic Mountains, and they get a lot of sunshine there. Anyway, a year later then, we did go up on that trip ourselves. Had a very enjoyable trip, and we went to Vancouver Island. Of course, you do this on ferries, and then on the ferry leaving from Vancouver Island over to the Olympic Peninsula, it happened to be on the anniversary.
On September 11th that next year.
And all the Canadians had their flags on half staff, and when we were on the ferry, they gave us each a little bouquet of flowers, and at 11 o'clock the ferry stopped, and I can't remember what was said.
Well, I
but,
think there was a little prayer or something.
And then we
silence. It was
dropped
silence.
the flowers into the water.
As a memory.
And it was interesting, whoever was on the PA system, I assume it was the captain of the ferry, the big ferry boat, said that the Coast Guard had contacted them and asked them if there was a problem because they had stopped for this little
Ceremony.
commemoration time.
Yeah, I forgot.
So, that was,
A year to the day later.
yeah, right.
Thank you.
Well, we were getting ready to leave that day on a trip to Ireland with Andy Wade's parents, and Maggie was just a couple of months old, so Mira was up very early and called us and said, "You're not going anywhere today. Turn on the TV." And so we did, sat mesmerized and tried to figure out what was going on, and of course the trip and all that stuff. And then our trip was canceled. And the next year, on September 11th, the first anniversary, we were in Ireland, and our guide had made commemorative candles for us. And on September 11th in 2002, we were in a church in Ireland saying our prayers, and the Irish people were very humbled by our tragedy.
That's profound. What else did you experience while you were in Ireland regarding?
Well, everyone was very kind to the American tourists at all times that we were there, but especially that day. And when we had our entrance into this very old church in a small town in Ireland, it just was, we all cried because it was just, I thought it was a real touch for the guide to have made these candles for all of us. There were 16 on this tour.
Wow.
So.
I actually was getting up in the morning and I turned the television on and I just couldn't figure out at first what was going on, and then of course I was horrified. I think that I actually saw one of the things hit. It was right after, or could have been during, I'm not sure if they had filmed that. So I called Ann Sutton, who used to be a member here, and she put her television on. And we were just shocked, I guess. And later, we said a lot of prayers, and then later we all went to Asbury. They had a community gathering and had a lot of prayers and just unbelievable.
When I first heard about the first plane, I was driving to school and listening to NPR. And the first thing I did was call my husband and have him turn on the television. Like many people, I thought it was maybe a small plane that had lost its way. And as more people arrived, and then as we needed to go into our classroom, it was important to not alarm young children. Everyone could not wait to hear subsequent news, and there was quite a buzz among the adults. But you kept that to yourselves and not alarmed the children. Over the week, as they would come back with questions or things from their home, you would factually answer the best that you could. But you tried to not be alarming or to dwell on it, or to involve them in a lot of your thoughts and fears, because you didn't want them to be fearful. definitely has an impact, like so many tragedies over time. I was often at school with children when John Kennedy was shot, our president, and many other. When the Challenger was lost, we were at school. We were together as a body, but you did not alarm children.
What was that like for you?
It is something that's always seared in your memory of all the tragedies that we've had as a nation. And I think it's important to remember them, but also remember our strength and our strength in numbers to recover from the tragedies we face.
Thank you.
Well, Zach was about a year and a half old at that time, and our routine was we'd get up about 7 and watch the Today Show while I nursed him in the morning, and I would usually keep the volume off, so we did the same thing that morning. And what the byline at the bottom of the TV said, World Trade Center, Twin Towers, and I didn't have the volume on, so I kept looking and seeing nothing, and I thought, well, that doesn't seem right, and I kept thinking, you know, I know what the Twin Towers look like, but maybe I was missing something, so I kept trying to look further into the background to see, and there was nothing to see until I finally turned the volume on and then heard what had happened. And
so that was after the towers had fallen?
That was after they had fallen.
They're just showing a blank?
Mm-hmm. Yep, there was just nothing there, you know, just lots of smoke, kind of, you know, dusty still, and just kind of empty sky. And then they did get into, you know, replaying again, showing the video of the towers collapsing and things like that. And Nathan was out in the garage getting ready to leave. Luckily, he was just going up to Spokane, but I went out to tell him what was going on. He didn't, you know, at first believe what I was saying or really understand, like, you have to come in and see this. And so we sat, and I said, are you still going? You know, even though he would drive to Spokane, you know, we just, at that moment, at first I couldn't think of anything, and then afterwards everything was just in total confusion, like, how is this going to affect my life immediately? And then, you know, I didn't really think of the huge picture, but it would just, all of a sudden I just felt mass confusion. Like I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing next, even just in my own home where we weren't really affected.
Yeah.
But it was hard to make myself think, okay, well, you know, should I get breakfast for myself? Well, yes, I should do that. And should I take my shower and get dressed? And yes, I should do all those things. But for me, it was just that, just utter confusion.
Yeah. What about now with children a little bit older?
Now with children a little bit older. For me, I think it's just really important to try to help them understand diversity and tolerance. I guess has been the main thing. And just kind of doing that in little ways. I mean, nothing real profound, I don't think, but just in little ways. And you know, you notice it, and luckily there's a lot more diversity in our population here in Hood River than there was where I grew up, for sure. And so it's a lot easier, I think, here than maybe in some places it would be.
Okay.
I was teaching up at Mid-Valley School, and one of my reactions was for the children and the kind of world that would be there for them as they grew up, and also thinking about then how we need to work harder with younger children and helping them grow up to learn how to negotiate and work through problems and not think of violence as the answer to differences of opinion and different ways of life.
Did that impact your teaching after that day then?
Well, we did work hard on sharing and working through problems. We had class meetings, so we'd sit in a circle and discuss what went wrong if they were out on the playground and there was a disagreement, and they talked about how to solve that and what they could say and did role playing and those kinds of things.
Well, my family, which consisted of my husband Jim and Eric, who was not quite 2 years old, and I, myself, we lived in a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, and September 10th, Eric broke his arm for the second time. So Eric and I were driving across Cleveland to get to the Children's Hospital on the opposite side of the city, where they had an orthopedic specialist who worked with children. So I remember driving in the car, and I had the radio on that morning, and I think that's when I first heard they broke in with a special report that some airplanes had hit the Twin Towers in New York City. And the information at that point was pretty sketchy, but we spent quite a bit of time at the hospital that day being shuttled to different places, and everywhere we went, if there was a television screen available anywhere, people were I just remember people being glued to the television, trying to get information, trying to understand what was happening. So I think my initial impression was just sort of one of confusion and almost disbelief. Something about it wasn't quite real. What's our next question? Remind me.
No, just what other thoughts, or did you reach out to connect anyone, or?
Well, we were our church obviously was excuse me. That was obviously the focus of any event at church that week and the following Sunday. Given our location, I think people in Cleveland maybe felt a special identity with the aircraft that went down in Pennsylvania, because it had flown over Cleveland airspace, and the reports were that they actually heard people screaming on the airplane. So there was a certain real sadness to that, but that was the closest one. And then I had friends at church who had friends in New York City who were affected more directly by the crashes.
Yeah. Thank you.
I was working at Bonneville Dam. I had just gotten to work. It was 6:30 in the morning, and I let a contractor in, and he said, "Have you been listening to the radio?" And I said, "No, I've been listening to a book on tape." So we turned the radio on, found out what was happening initially. That was just with the first tower. And immediately decided we need to put the project on alert because of the potential threat. As the day unfolded and the news announced that Bonneville Dam was the #1 target in the state of Oregon, the news media descended on the project. People were in turmoil trying to decide what to do. I basically locked down the project and kicked all the public off, including the media. They set up their satellite trucks over on the Washington side, waiting for somebody to fly a plane into the dam. It was rather chaotic. There was a barge coming upriver. Barge company called and said they had 3 million gallons of jet fuel on board. And I frankly ignored my direction from the office to close the lock, and I locked them through and called the rest of the dams along the river to move the jet fuel up to Walla Walla so it could be unloaded and not be a target on the river. We posted guards on the rooftop of the dam, and it became just a minute by minute trying to keep all the people working calm and yet aware of what was going on. So it was a very stressful day. I went outside of the gates to do some press interviews, but I wouldn't let the press on the project.
How about for you personally? What were your thoughts that day?
Keeping the people of the project safe, trying to decide if we needed to send everybody home. We decided not to. Like I said, we had people with binoculars on top of the dam watching and kept the in and out to a minimum. But again, it was like the rest of the country. Confusion, what's going on, what's going to happen elsewhere. I did know people in the Pentagon. I know some people that were killed when the plane flew into it. And, great concern, as as each, first tower, then the second tower, then the plane in Pennsylvania, and the Pentagon. It was just staggering to me. One other thing, though, I just wanted to add was, up until that time, I had not chosen a particular congregation to be mine, and in the weeks that followed, I decided that I really needed a home congregation, and that was part of what precipitated me coming to Our Redeemer.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Where I was a real physical place. It was our living room on Wither Rock Road, I think. No, it was on Schoolhouse Road, where we live now. And we were packing our bags to go to Alaska. Had the television running as usual on news channel. And we were just, happily on our way. And all of a sudden, we saw something on TV that looked like some kind of catastrophe. We didn't know what it was to begin with, and then when we started watching it, discovered that it was the airplanes, the planes going into the side of the buildings in New York. And I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought for a moment it was some kind of Orson Welles kind of a make-up story, and then the more I watched it, the more I realized that it wasn't a make-up story. It was really happening, and it was happening right then. And I began to think about our churches that were right near there, and the people that were there, and the people that were in the building, and I began to pray. But I still had this feeling of, it couldn't be real. Oh, but it is real. It couldn't be real. Then I had another thing happen. As I was preparing, I began to think, maybe we shouldn't go to Alaska. It looks like they're closing down all airlines and ships and trains and everything. Maybe it's not a good idea. And then it dawned on me that I should do as I usually do and not do what makes me react to fear. And my sense of fear wanted me to close up and stay home. And then the other part of my awareness was that of hope, and that I just couldn't let go of hope, even though I was fearful. So I kind of carried those two emotions with me as I remembered the love of Jesus Christ for me, for others, for all of us, and for those who were flying aircraft, and for the families of these people that ruined and devastated so many of us. They also ruined and devastated themselves and families. And prayer was the only response I could think of.